Hi, in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to create this app on the screen, which will manage a list of users, allow you to sort the list, remove an item, and to add new people. So let's see what this looks like, and then we'll get started. So let's take a peek at the program before we start coding it and see if you're interested. So you can see I have a few names entered into a list already, and if I choose Add, I can put some more. So let's put in Daryl. And when we click OK, you can see that we have now added Daryl. I have a sorting ability, so I can alphabetize them from least to greatest or from the reverse to the front. And I can also delete somebody. So if we want to get rid of Michael from the group, we can tell it, yes, I want to delete it, and it disappears. So multiple things are going on, and let's take a look at what things you're going to learn, and then we'll code the thing together. So here's some of the items that you're going to see. We're going to first of all put a list box in, and we'll be adding items to it. So a list box is a control that is meant to display strings or items of people, for instance. We're going to make a data source, which is going to be simply a list of strings. And you notice the keyword static in here. So we'll explain what static is and why you might want to have it when you have multiple forms on an application. We're going to create our own custom dialog box so we can fill in data. So we're only going to put a string in here, but you can imagine that there could be a dialog box with other things such as numbers and dates and strings as well. Now we're also going to have a tricky thing called a binding source. A binding source is the ability to connect a list to a control, like a list box. And we need to update that whenever there's a change, such as adding a name or deleting it. So we'll get through the binding source as well. We're also going to have a show and hide form demonstration here. So if you're trying to create a multi-form app, then this is the tutorial that will show you how to work that out, so that way we can pop up a new message. We're also going to be able to pass data between forms. So can you put data into one form and then add it to the list on the other form? So another tricky item. And then we're going to be able to sort the list. So that way we can sort it from least to greatest or from reverse order as well. So sorting in this case is alphabetizing. And so all of that's going to require what's called a combo box. We'll do a drop-down list. And so here's some code that you'll eventually see during the tutorial. And then we're going to finally be able to delete an item. So we'll have a confirmation dialog box that will appear, and I'll show you how to create your own custom confirmation and get the results from that, whether it's a yes or no reply. So this deceptively simple looking app has a lot of features in it, and so if you're trying to figure out how to make Windows Forms apps, this is the great place to start. If this is interesting, let's get started and code right away. My name is Shad Sluter, and I teach software development at Grand Canyon University. So what you're watching is part of my class. So if you're one of my students, I'll be here to help you out, of course, in person. But if you're watching over the shoulder, welcome, and I hope you learned something in software development too. Let's get started with building the app. So I'm going to switch into Visual Studio, which is what we're going to program in, and just show you where we're headed. So this is a finished version of the app. You can see I have Form 1 set up with a list box. And let's set up Form 2, which is the data entry box. So we'll be creating that. We're going to be doing a lot of code. So if I look into Form 1, you can see that we're going to be coding all of this here. And Form 2 has also some code behind it. So this is going to take some time to be able to get through this and explain it, so that way you can adapt it to your own projects. But that's why you're watching the tutorial, isn't it? So let's get started with building the forms. First thing I'm going to do is go to File and choose New, make a new project. Now we're working with Windows Forms apps, so I'm searching in my list for C#, .NET Framework, Windows Forms app. I've previously used this option, so it shows up in my list. You're probably going to have to go find it in one of the items in all of these choices here. So I'm going to click Next, and I'm going to call this thing List Manager app. So a List Manager app is really what we're trying to demonstrate here, how to manage a list. Okay, we got Form 1. So Form 1 is going to display all of the items. So we are going to put in a list box item. So let's shrink the size here. And what I'm looking for is list box. So I go over to my toolbox. By the way, if you can't see the toolbox, you can always choose View and go select it from the list here. And that will bring it up. So I'm looking for list box. And this one here looks like it. So I'm going to drag it in, and we'll leave it just as its default name. And so we'll stretch it out so we get some width, and then we'll adjust the form size to leave a little bit for the buttons at the bottom, and then also enough to give some length to our names. Okay, so now we need a couple of buttons. I need one button, I guess. So I'm going to drop him at the bottom. And then I'm going to have the sortable list here, which is called a combo box. So a combo box will drag in next to it. All right, so that's the items for Form 1. We're going to configure them a bit, but that's the design. Now let's set some properties up here. So we'll start with button 1. So for button 1, I'm going to change his text. Instead of button 1, I'm going to choose the word add, or maybe add name, so that we know what's going to happen. Now for the drop-down box, I want this to be a sortable item. So I'm going to select the drop-down, and I'm looking for something called items in here, and let's see where that might lie. So the items collection here is listed, and I choose the 3 dots at the end, and now I can add whatever items I want to drop down. So I'm going to have one be symbolizing the forward order, and the other one is a reverse order, so I'll show A to Z or Z to A. Okay, so that's my items for Form 1. Now I want to add Form 2 to my project, so I'm going to the List Manager solution and choose Add, and I'm going to choose a new item. What I'm looking for is a form, so let's see if we can find form in the list. So it looks like form is right there on the 3rd item, and we'll choose Add. So Form 2 shows up. Now this is a data entry form, so let's put in a few items to indicate what the user is supposed to do. So let's drop in a label to tell us what the user is supposed to do. This says add a name. Then we're going to grab an edit text item, or a text box, you call it. A text box is where you put in data entry. So we'll drag a text box in and stretch it out to be a little wider. Then we're going to have 2 buttons, one for canceling and one for the OK. So let's label the second one as OK. So we'll change his text to OK, and the first one will set the text to be cancel. So we have our controls here. Lastly, let's go ahead and shrink this screen so that it's only big enough to hold the data form. And now we've got Form 2. Form 2 name could probably be better than Form 2, so let's change his text. I'm going to say add a name. And we've got ourselves the Form 2. So we've got Form 1 designed, and we've got Form 2 designed. So let's run the app just to make sure that we know what it looks like, and we can visualize where we're going from here. So I got the app up here. It says Form 1. You can see that I have 2 items in my dropdown. Nothing happens if I choose them. If I click Add Name, also nothing happens. So the rest of the tutorial is going to be how to program this so we can fill up this list and sort it and delete items from it. Now the first action I want to do is to have one form show another form, and we'll do that with the Add button. So I'm going to double click on the Add button, which will add a click listener to this button. So button 1 click is the event. First of all, I'll put a note here to tell you what we're trying to do. Form 1 will open up Form 2 when the Add button is clicked. Now we have to get a reference to this Form 2 class. So you can see that in my Solution Explorer, I do have something called Form 2, and I can refer to it in the code as the class name Form 2. The instance we'll call F2. Now this is simple. We can just show the form. There's a couple options for show form though. So if I type in f2.show, you can see that there is a show, which is the standard show, and another one called ShowDialog, which we will eventually end up using. So we'll first use the word show, and that just refers to its action to make this visible. And we'll put in the parentheses to make sure that it's a method. Now let's go ahead and try this out and see if it works. Okay, so we got the app running, and when I click the Add button, or Add Name, you can see that Show produces Form 2, and I can close Form 2, not with these buttons, but I can close it with the X. So this is one way to show a form. Now we want to go back to the other form, so let's go into the Form 2 designer, and let's say if we click the OK button here, we want to go back to Form 1. So the notes here will tell us what to do. All right, so let's do some code to make this happen. So we're going to have to get a reference to Form 1, so I'm going to make a variable called F1. It's of the type Form 1. Then I'm going to show it. So when this item is clicked, let's show Form 1 again. And this isn't going to work quite like we want, but it'll get us closer. And then we're going to close form 2. So the word this that we're going to put in here refers to form 2. I can use the word this because it is inside of this class. That's what it means. So we could do form2.close, or in this case, I'm going to say this.close. Let's see how this works. Okay, the app's up and running. I'm going to click the add button, and sure enough, we get form 2. Now, if I click OK, you're going to see that form 1 is shown, but it's shown twice. And if I try to show the add button again, I'm getting multiple copies of form 1. So it is showing form 1, but this might be one of the reasons you came to the tutorial, is that you get this behavior and you don't know what to do. So let's fix this. It's a simple fix if you know what to do. Now the key to make this work correctly is found in the first button. So let's go to the add name button. And instead of show, I'm going to erase that event and type in the word show and then the word dialog. So ShowDialog is a different behavior. It's going to suspend the ability to click on form 1, and then it will display form 2. So in form 2, we don't have to do quite as much code here either. So let's just knock out these for a moment, and let's see what happens if we just close form 2. We'll run the program again. Okay, so we're going to run the form, and I'm going to click the add button. So form 2 pops up. Now notice a slightly different behavior. If I try to click on the previous form, I'm getting an error message. So the only part of the app that I can click on now is this dialog box. So that right there is an advantage. So ShowDialog works better. And now when I click OK, the form 2 disappears and then form 1 is left in its place. So simpler code and the behavior that you expect a normal app to do. Now the next part is I'd like to have a list of names that we can put into our list box, and then we'll be able to add and subtract those. So let's make a new variable in our form. So I'm going into form1cs. This is the code where we were just doing the click event. And I'm going to start at the top of the form. So the first thing I'm going to do is define a variable, and we'll call this thing of type list. And it's a list of strings. And we're going to have a bunch of names, so that's a good name for it. I'll just call it names. And then we'll instantiate it, so we'll have a new blank list. It's no values or no items in the list yet. So what I want to do next is to go into the form constructor. So the constructor, remember, is the item that runs whenever the class is first launched or instantiated. And so in this case, it's the form1 constructor. Now I'm going to create a bunch of names, maybe 3 names here that we can start with. And I'm going to use different name letters to start with so we can alphabetize them eventually. So I'm going to create Adam, Dennis, and Charity. And we're going to use that with names.add. And so we're probably going to delete this in some time in the future, but for right now, we're going to be able to have some sample data to get us started quickly. Now this won't actually display anything in our list yet. So just because I have a list of names doesn't mean that it's associated with the list box. We have to do something called a binding source to make that happen. So to create a binding source, we use the data type binding source. It's an object that's in C#, and its purpose is to connect lists to list objects like the list box. And so I'm going to name this thing as names binding source. You can choose a more descriptive name if you can think of something that you can remember better. But names binding source makes sense to me because I'm going to be working with the names list. Now let's go to an event called form load. Do we see form load on the screen? We don't. We can make that though if I go back to the designer and I double click on the background, and a new item will appear in the code called form1 load. So this is when the form is displayed on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to put some notes together. This is the process that we're going to do to get the names from our list into the list box. So first of all, I want to set the data source for our binding, our names binding source. Then the next thing we're going to do is associate that binding source with the list box. So the first item is going to be the names binding source dot data source. And we're going to give that a data source as the list variable. So we're going to say it equals names. Now, in some applications, you might associate this directly with something in a database. You can associate a binding source with multiple things. We're doing one of the simplest ways is associating it with a list. Now we need to tell the listbox that we're using this BindingSource class. So we'll say listbox1.DataSource is going to be equal to this name's BindingSource. So this is supposed to happen when the form loads. We should be able to run the program now and to see if it actually works. We should see 3 names in the list. Okay, look, the app is up and running, and sure enough, we have these 3 people. So the binding source seems to be doing its job. So if you don't see that, go back and double check to make sure that you got all of the items here. So we have these 2 items in the form load area, and we defined them earlier up here in the very top of our class. So that is the process for the first steps of getting data into a list box. Now the next step in our process is I'd like to add a new name. So let's go and work on form 2. Remember, form 2 is the dialog box that is asking for a new string. So how are we going to make that work when we try to pass data back into our form 1? So let's switch into form 2 and see if we can make that happen. So to make that happen, I'm going to set up an instance of form 1. So we'll redefine F1 again. And so that way we can talk about it in our code. Then I'm going to create a new method. I'm going to just invent it here and then code it in the other form. So I'm going to call this thing receive data. So there's more than one way to send data around, but this is one that seems to make sense to me. So if I have an event called receive data, I need a parameter. What am I going to send to it? Well, I want to send a string, which is the person's name. And so I could just get that directly from the text box, which is called textbox1.text. So that is whatever the user entered. So now, of course, we've invented a function or a method out of thin air, and the computer is angry with us again with the red line. Let's see what it says. It says, Form 1 does not contain a definition for receive data. Well, it's not a default method. We want to make one that is customized, really. And so let's see if there's some suggestions that will do that for us. So I'm going to click the link that says Show Potential Fixes. And it says you could generate this method. We'll do it for you. Well, that's what I want to do. So I'm going to click it. And what happened? Did it go away? Did the error disappear? Well, the error did disappear. Where's my new method? Well, it's in Form 1, so it's not going to show any code changes on this screen. Let's switch over to Form 1 and see if it's there. And sure enough, it is. So what this is doing now is it says, I am going to receive a string of text, and then you can do with it whatever you want. So what I want to do is to take the text from the other guy, from Form 2, and add it to names. So let's just choose names.add, and then the name text comes from the parameter text up here. So we could, instead of putting text, I could call this thing new name. That would make it more sensible to us. And then I'd have to rename it down here. So I got new name. So whatever you decide to call it is irrelevant, but it does have to show that the parameter name is going to be a string that is added to the list. So will that work? Let's try it out and see what kind of results we get. I can tell you it won't work, but then we'll see why in a minute. Okay, got the app up and running, so I'm going to choose add name, and I'm going to put some stuff in and click OK. Nothing appears. Let's try it again. Why didn't it work? So let's go back and find this function called add item. That's where we were. Now I'm going to put in a message box. So this is one way to tell what's happening is you just pop up these things once in a while. And what I want to show is I'm going to say item count equals, and then I'm going to print the numbers. So names.count is going to tell me how many people are in my list of friends. So we have 3, we know that. What will the count be after I try adding a new one? This should tell us something about how well my app is working. So we're going to run it again. I'm going to try add a name. I'm going to put in some junk and click OK. Now you can see the results say that we have item count equals 4. So we've added another name. And I still only have 3 here. Let's try and add another one. Let's add somebody else and click OK. And we have item count equals 4. I would have expected it to go up. So why is it not adding somebody to my list? Let's see if we can fix that problem. I'm going to come back into the main program here in Form 1. So a couple of things that we need to change. First of all, if we look at line 18, we can see that the names of the list is instantiated every time we create a new form. And then we add some people here. So what would happen if I change this to the word static? Now, if I choose static, it's going to keep the list around from one instance to another. And so when we're recreating the form, we are showing a new form. And so static will keep a list that is shared among multiple instances. So this will get us closer, but the fact that we're adding new names every time we create a new form is going to also complicate things, so we're probably going to end up deleting this. But let's see what the behavior looks like now and see if we can understand what object-oriented programming is doing to us. So I got 3 people. I'll try to add a name. I'll put in something. It says item count equals 7. Did you expect 7? Neither did I. So 7. Let's try it again. Let's try adding somebody else and click OK. And now it says 11. Let's see. So it's adding a bunch of people, 4 people every time. So it's adding 1 from form 2. And then it's probably adding 3 more each time we instantiate this form. So we've got some design problems here. First of all, I'm going to take away these guys down here that say names adds. So let's remove them from the list. So I'm going to comment out multiple people so they no longer show up. And then the second thing is I'm going to go to create a new method for this form. So let's go to Form 1 Designer, click on the form, and I want to get to the actions, so the little lightning bolt. And I'm looking for something called form activate. So let's scroll down a bit here, and activated comes up. So I'm going to double click in there, and a new method called activated is now added to my code. So you have to understand what this method is when it's called. So it is activated means that the form has been made visible again, or it's regained its focus. That means it comes back into the front. So this occurs after Form 2 closes. So what I need to do is update the binding source now to tell it that we have a new name. So the function or the method is called reset bindings. So I call that on the name's binding source. Now let's go see what's wrong with it, because you can see it's angry. It's got an underline there, so we can't do it this way. It says here, the control cannot use this method as written because there's an argument missing. It's supposed to be a Boolean value. And the Boolean value is a true or a false. True means that the metadata has changed. Well, what is the metadata? Well, the metadata is simply strings or integers or what kind of data type is in your list. So have we changed the list type? We're still using strings. We've always been using strings for the list names. What happens if we changed it to an integer, though? Then the metadata would change. So if we're not changing the type of names from string to anything else, the data that we need to put in here is the Boolean false, telling it, don't worry, we haven't changed anything, you're still looking at strings. So this reset should allow the strings to repopulate in listbox 1. I'm going to say if it actually works by clicking start. Okay, so now we don't have any new buddy. Let's try add a name. Let's try ASDF. And it says you have 1 item in the list, and click OK, and there is ASDF. Let's try somebody else. I'm going to try somebody that starts with a Z and click OK. Now it says you've got 2 items in the list, and you click OK, and there they are. So it looks to me like we've got somebody doing its job. We've got the Form 2, and we've got the ability to update the list and refresh listbox 1. I'm going to take out that annoying pop-up box because it's just counting the items, and I see that the count seems to be working correctly. So go back to the receive data area, and let's comment out the message box because I don't want to see the item count show up all the time. So we've got ourselves the ability to add items to the list. Congratulations. Now in the next phase here, let's see if we can delete an item from the list. So if I want to delete an item, let's go back and add a new method. So this time I'm going to click once on listbox 1, And let's see if there's a click event in here somewhere. So if I look in the lightning bolt area for actions and choose click, there it is. So I'm going to double click it and we get a new item. It says listbox1 click. Now we have to get something from these parameters. So a sender item shows up. So a key term here is going to be the selected item or the selected index from this list box. So I'm going to type in listbox1.selectedIndex. Now I can use that for some purposes, but the first thing I'm going to do is just try to display it to the screen. So I'm just going to make a message box that says you clicked item number, and then we will print off that selected index value. So the selected index is whichever item in the list is chosen. So we're going to get an index order, so it's going to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. Let's see what that does when I run it. So this won't work if we don't have any names in it properly. So I'm going to put in somebody. I'm going to put in ABC, and then I'm going to put in another guy. Let's call him B something, and the next one, let's do C with a bunch of letters. So I've got some names. Now, what happens if I click somebody? So I click this one, and it says here, you clicked item number 1. So it looks like we're counting from 0, 1, and so on. So let's count the first one. It says here, you clicked on item 0. So it is telling us which item in the list that we clicked. This is good. There's going to be a problem though, and I'll show you that. I'm going to restart the app, and let's see what the problem might be. So now we got the app up and running. If I click it, and it says here, you clicked item -1. Why is that? Well, it's because there were no items in the list, and so the click index is a negative value. We'll have to keep that in mind, because we're going to try to delete these items after we click them. Now when I click an item, I'm going to interpret that as the wish to delete an item. And so we're going to capture, first of all, the index value and save it as an I, so an integer I. Then we're going to remove the name from position I. So the names are stored in the names list. And so names.remove at is the command I'm looking for. And then we provide the letter or the number I. And so we're going to have to reset the bindings again, because if the list's value or if the data source is updated, then we need to reset the bindings. Now this will work great as long as we click on a real name. If we try to do a -1, then we're going to have a problem. So let's test that out and make sure that I'm right on that prediction. Okay, let's run the app. So first of all, I'm going to add a new name, and then add a second name, and then a third name. Okay, so now if I click somebody like the third one, you can see that it removed it. I'm going to click the first one, and now I have one left. I click him, it's gone, and now if I click, I get a crash. The index is probably out of bounds. It says, yep, exactly that. So you cannot remove an item from position -1. -1 doesn't exist in the list, and so we've introduced a runtime error. Let's fix that. So we can fix that pretty simply. We're just going to check to see if the value of I is greater than or equal to 0. If it is greater than or equal to 0, that means we actually clicked a real element, and now we should remove it. Let's see if that works any better. Okay, the app is up and running, so I'm going to put in a name, and then I'll click it to remove it. So I'll click on the name, it's gone, I'll click it again, and now when I click on the empty list, the program just doesn't respond. It doesn't do anything. So that's a good behavior. We don't accidentally crash the app. Now let's put in a confirmation before we just suddenly delete a user. We're going to warn the user before they actually try it. So what I'm looking for is a dialog box that will say, do you really want to do this? So let's make messagebox.show and say, would you like to delete? And I'll pick up the names at position I. So it'll say, would you like to delete Elmo? And then the next parameter is the title of the box. And so I'll just call that confirm delete. So that'll appear up in the menu bar area. And then finally, we need to tell it what kind of dialog box there is. And there's some predefined ones. So message box buttons dot. And you can choose, in this case, probably yes or no, which is a good response. So one of these two will produce a yes or a no button. Now this is the wrong place for this. I'm going to cut this out, and we don't want to do this until we come into the if statement. So if they've actually clicked on a valid user, then we can ask for it. Now I want to save this result. So I'm going to save the result as a property called dialog result. So that will save whatever they clicked, whether it's a yes or a no. So it's a special class or a special property here that is predefined. And then in the next line down, we're going to ask, is this result the affirmative? And so if it's affirmative, that means dialog result dot yes. So that means the yes button was chosen. So whatever these values are, they're probably just integers in the background, such a yes corresponds to a 2 or something like that. But we don't really care what those values are. We just use these predefined values, such as dialog result. And if it is a yes, then we'll go ahead and complete the delete. And if it's a no, then we can ignore it and nothing will happen. So let's check to see if this works like it's supposed to. Okay, so we're up and running. We got form 1. I'm going to put in a name, and let's put in another name. And we got 2 names. So now I'm going to click the second name. And it does ask, confirm delete, would you like to delete this? And if I choose no, it stays there. Let's try it again. I'm going to click it, and this time I choose yes, and it's gone. I'm going to delete the last one, and I'll delete him, and I'll test it out. Empty lists, nothing happens. So far so good. We've got ourselves the ability to add and delete. What does not work yet is sorting. So let's do that next. Okay, if we're going to sort this list, we need to have another event. So I'm going to select this item here, and let's actually double click it. And it'll create an item called selected index changed. Now we can do an action based on which item we chose. So now what I want to check is to see which one of these 2 were selected from the list. So we're going to ask if the combo box dot selected item, if that equals the string of A arrow Z, that means we want to do forward sorting. If that's the case, then we can simply tell it to do names dot sort, and by default, a list of strings is sorted in alphabetical order. And then once we've changed the data source, we need to tell it listbox, we're going to update you again, so we'll do reset bindings. And once again, it's false because we don't have to change the data type. Now, what happens if they selected anything else? Let's do an else statement. So the only other alternative that we want to handle is to sort in reverse order. So that's what the else will assume. So let's do first of all, sort it in forward order and then reverse the string. So that means the last item will go to the front. So 2 steps to do reverse sorting. Then you notice the binding is supposed to come next. So let's just save the binding for 1 statement instead of 2. We can not repeat ourselves this way. So we'll do bindings of reset bindings after the if statement is done. Let's see if that works and see if we can sort. Okay, got the app up and running. So I'm going to put in a couple of names here. Let's try Andy. So he's an A. And let's put in somebody that's like near the end. So put in Zach. And let's put in somebody in the middle. Let's try Mike. So I've got 3 names so far, maybe 1 more just to prove things out. So I'll put in Shad. That's a cool name. And now we've got ourselves 4 names. They're obviously not in alphabetical order. Now I'm going to go and choose one of these. So let's try A to Z. And sure enough, Andy is first and Zach is last. Let's try the others from Z to A. And you can see that the reverse order is true. Now if I click on Mike, it says, do you want to delete Mike? And yes, Mike is gone. So it looks to me like sorting was one of the easiest parts of our process here once we got bindings figured out and all that. Now this is kind of odd. I've got this ability to type in here and then press enter. We don't want that behavior. We just want to be able to select these 2 and not have to type anything in. So that's a simple property that we can update. So let's switch back into the designer view, and I'm going to select the combo box, and let's go over to the right side. And instead of events, I'm going to choose properties, and let's scroll up to the top. What I'm looking for is something, I think it's called drop-down style. So right now it's set to drop-down. There's simple, and what I want is drop-down list. And therefore it will not show any way to type things in. Just run that 1 more time to confirm, and we should be able to not be able to type. So I'm going to add some name and click OK. So you can see now that the drop-down list allows me to select an item, but I cannot type a new one. So sorting one name doesn't seem to make any difference. So this list manager app showed us many different things. We looked at the list box control, and we were able to add items to it. We had to work on a static data source, so that way it would work from one instance to another. We created our own custom dialog box so that we could add a name. We could also work on binding sources, and so we created an instance called BindingSource, and we updated it whenever we changed our data. We did show and hide, so that way one form could show another, and we showed that ShowDialog boxes was better if we wanted to treat this as a data entry form. We were able to pass data between forms, so that way we can update the list. And then finally, we were able to sort the list. So we went from the first A to Z and then from Z to A using code that looked like this, where we would just do a names.sort command. Finally, we did a delete item and we did a confirmation so that way we could pop up a dialog box with a yes or no. So my name is Shad Sluter and I teach software development and computer science at Grand Canyon University. Thanks for sticking with me all the way through the end here. If you want to find out more about C# programming, you can do more than just these WinForm apps. You can create web apps. And so that's using a framework called ASP.NET. Also, if you'd like to learn how to program in Java or JavaScript or Python and work with databases and CSS and HTML, all kinds of software development here, right here on YouTube. So you can join me in class if you're a student at GCU, or if you're watching from somewhere else on the planet, welcome aboard.